Welcome to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. I'm your host, David Nolan. Today, I'm talking with Ron Gebhardtsbauer, one of the authors of a new white paper from the Academy, Social Security and Financially Disadvantaged Groups. Ron, welcome to Actuary Voices.
Thank you, David. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. What we like to do is start off by asking people how they came to become an actuary and a little bit about their past and where they're from and so on. So could you start there for us, please?
Sure. Well, as most actuaries, we started out being really good in mathematics back in grade school. But I also liked history and science because it helped explain the world to me. And I was in the school plays, the lead, singing in the choir and playing in the band. But I had to decide which one was the right one for me to major in college. And it was my senior year where it became pretty evident that not only did I like math, but I was good at it. I got the math award at my high school. And so I decided to go to Penn State as a math major. And I figured, well, maybe I'll teach someday. My dad was in the academic world, so I sort of figured that's where I would go. But my junior year at Penn State, Penn State hired an actuarial professor from Wharton, and I became his teaching assistant, and I really liked it. And my mom had a good friend who was an actuary, and she said, "Oh, that is a much better place to go than being a professor or a teacher." So I chose the actuarial field, and I'm really glad I did because it ended up being very good. It ended up giving me the good life that I have now as a retiree.
Great. Well, that sounds good. And it's somewhat unusual because about 50% of our participants go straight through and become an actuary without any deviations. And we've had lots of other people who kind of fell into it almost by accident. So I'll put you in the straight through category. So you actually have a history with the Academy in that you worked as a fellow here. Do you want to tell us how that position came about and what kind of work you did when you were here?
Yeah, I've had a lot of great opportunities in my actuarial career. And from 1996 to 2008, so that was 12 years, I was the Academy's senior pension fellow. In fact, I was the first and only pension fellow for many years. My job was to try and convince the Academy that this was a good idea. And because Social Security was such a hot topic, I got very involved in Social Security, and we ended up being on the nightly news every night of the week just prior to the election. And some of us were a little bit nervous about, oh my gosh, we're too much in the news. But the actuarial organizations from both the UK and Mexico thought it was great, and they wondered, how did we get so involved? So that was a great period. I led the White House Conference on Social Security when Clinton was president, and a lot of top people. He gave me the microphone because he had to leave to go to a funeral, and so I ended up being in charge of it. So there's some really neat experiences there. And now, of course, the Academy has lots of senior fellows in each practice area.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so you forged a path and one that got wider as you went along it. So, and I think we are very grateful for that because it does provide, so to speak, in-house special counsel for when big issues come up, as Social Security did in your time, and obviously the Affordable Care Act a few years later with Coriacello. Tell us. Obviously, it's very exciting to be in the White House and being given the microphone by the president. But overall, what do you find most personally fulfilling about the profession?
Well, I've had lots of experiences like that, not only as the senior pension fellow, but also, for example, I was the chief actuary of a government agency called the PBGC, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, where we helped make sure that people who had pensions, and if their company went bankrupt, like Eastern Airlines and steel plants like LTV and Wheeling Pitt, if their company went bankrupt and they maybe didn't have enough money in the pension plan, then we took over their pension plans. And some of those pension plans were huge. And so we took them over, made sure everybody continued to get their pension, even though there was not enough money in those pension plans. Another job that I really loved, I got when I was working at the academy, I was only working part time because they couldn't afford me full time, I guess. And so I had outside work through the Department of Commerce and Department of Labor to work in Eastern Europe. They were coming out of communism, and they were getting a lot of money, but they had to spend it on U.S. consultants. So they hired me. So I got to help Bulgaria with their social security system. I helped Romania with their life insurance system, and Poland with their pension system, and ditto for Vietnam. I actually helped them, even though they're still communists. So a lot of great experiences there. So PPGC, helping people, a lot of international work. I've had a fun life. And then to top it off, my last 12 years, I went back to the academic world and taught students for 12 years in actuarial science, headed up the major. And it was really great to pass on my knowledge from the real world onto my students.
So your career started on one trajectory, took a deviation for a few decades, and then ended up back where you thought you might have started.
Right. I
Um,
started out in an insurance company, went into pension consulting. And so that's what I thought I would do, just pension consulting all the way. But then I decided, I want to work for government because a lot of people in my church in Washington, D.C. were civil servants.
mm,
And the idea of being a servant really appealed to me. So that's when I went into the government and became the actuary for the federal employee retirement system and then the PBGC after that.
right. And it's certainly rewarding when you can see that the fruits of your labor are helping real people in real time.
Right.
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 Great. Well, you mentioned Social Security a couple of times, so I'm going to jump right in there. You've recently helped author a paper on Social Security and financially disadvantaged groups. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of that paper itself, which is a hefty piece of work, can you give people who might not have a great idea about Social Security what its benefits are and what it aims to do?
Yeah, Social Security is a very important program. And one of the things I had to learn as a pension actuary, a funded pension plan by an employer is very different than Social Security. So for a year, I didn't do anything but learn Social Security. And the people that helped me, like Steve Goss and Karen Glenn at Social Security, were very helpful to me and still are. Um, so it's very different. Way back in the 30s, there was the Depression, and they needed to do something in retirement. Other countries like Germany had done it. So Social Security started back in the 40s, and now it's known. Like one of the things I did at the academy was I would go and give talks in all the states around the country with a member of Congress, the senator or the representative from that area. And invariably, the first thing they would say is Social Security has been one of the most valuable programs of the U.S. government. A lot of people say Social Security is what keeps most people out of being in poverty. Well, but not everybody. And so that gets back to some of the origins of Social Security. Um, FDR realized that it couldn't just be this flat dollar amount equal to, say, poverty and give everybody the poverty benefit, even though high income people were paying a lot more in taxes than low income people. So there's two principles to Social Security. One is that it provide an adequate benefit for people. And the other one is that it be individually equitable. So if you put more in, you get more out. But the socially adequate piece, it's not always bigger than poverty. So some people can get a benefit from Social Security that's less than poverty. And that's a big concern. So what we did is we looked at what are some of the groups in the United States that on average, they don't do as well. And so some of the groups we looked at were ethnic and racial minorities. They have a lot of low income people, or the other problem for getting a small Social Security benefit is maybe you did not work a full career. So if you don't get a full career, your benefit is based on your 35-year average. So if only half a years, there's a number where you actually made money and the rest of the years are zero, then your Social Security benefit's not going to be as big. I don't want it to sound that bad though, because actually people on the low income area, they get two, three times more than they ever put in. So it's still a good deal for them. But if they didn't make much, their Social Security benefits maybe not going to be above poverty. So we talked in this paper, how should we address this? What are some of the ideas that Congress is coming up with and proposing for these people? Um, uh, uh,
I'm
Maybe I should
sure.
stop
Yeah.
there.
Well, let's jump right into that. So, what are the problems that the paper is looking to highlight?
Okay, I did mention the good thing I was going to tell you earlier is that way back in the 1950s, the poverty rate for people age 65 and over was 35%. So it's come down to a 9% poverty rate for people 65 and over. So it's great. In fact, the amazing thing about that is that that's a lower poverty rate than people in the working years, like 20 to 65, which is 11%. So our retirees are doing better than working level people. And then children are even worse. Their poverty rate's something like 17, 18%. So that's maybe where we should be focusing. What should we be doing? When I go to a movie, the guys giving out the tickets or the food always want to give me a discount. I say, no, no, no. You're the one that needs the discount. Us old people, we're the rich ones because of Social Security. So most of us are doing pretty well because we save too. But there are a lot of people that Social Security is their only income and it's less than the poverty level. And so what should we do? Well, I'll give you an example of what happens. Um, Say you have a married couple, two people, and they had the same wages all their careers. So they have about the same benefit. Say each one of them has $1,000 each. So 2,000 a month times 12 months a year, they get 24,000. So they're above poverty. Poverty level is like 17,000 for two people. But when one of them dies, they lose half their income. It doesn't always happen under Social Security. If you're a high earner and a low earner, it changes. But for a very typical couple, their income drops in half. So instead of earning 24,000 when the first person dies, the second person is only earning $12,000 a year, and now they're below poverty. The poverty threshold for one person over 65 is like 14,000 somewhere in there. But it your need in retirement doesn't drop in half. When one dies, you still need a kitchen, you still need a car. So these people really are in poverty. So one way that we could fix that has been proposed by many senators and representatives is that the benefit to the survivor should at least be 75% of what their total income was before. So in my example, they would not get 12,000 after the death of the first person. They'd get 18,000. So they'd be above the poverty level. So that's one idea. And that also is important and infects a lot of single people who are just in general, who had low wages. They need more than half of what two people need. And so a lot of times single people also are in poverty. And this may be their only benefit. And so some of the ideas for that are to have a minimum benefit, or another idea is to make the formula more progressive, which would mean make the benefit for for the lower income people higher, and pay for it by lowering the benefit of high income people. And even the Republican Party is pushing that idea, surprisingly, because they say, we can't afford this whole security benefit, and some of these benefits are really big. So the people at the top come down. They would actually make it a flat benefit, which would violate FDR's principle that it needs to be individually equitable. If you pay in a little more, you should get a little more. So um, so what a lot of people say is it should be progressive, but you should always get a little more if you put more in. So I have other examples, but I don't know how much time we have.
Sure. Well, we can delve in a little bit deeper, and you mentioned a couple of groups that were especially in need of Social Security, and is that generally to do with their relative poverty levels while they were working, or are there other issues at play?
Oh, totally. You hit it on the nose. They had low incomes while they're working, or maybe they're immigrants and they only worked part of their career, so they're going to get a small benefit. Other people are people who didn't report their income, and that could be a lot of immigrants, for example. They don't think it's a good idea. And so, for example, you were interested in anecdotes. I had a housekeeper, And I said, she should be paying money into Social Security because you get 2 or 3 times back what you put in. And she said, well, no, I can't afford it because I need the money now. I need the cash now. And I said, well, there's another interesting thing. And when I talk to actuaries, they don't know about this sometimes, but there's the earned income tax credit in the federal tax system. It returns your Social Security benefit. I mean, your Social Security taxes if you're under the poverty level, around 12, 13, 14,000. It totally returns it. In fact, if you have kids, you get 2 or 3 times back. So I was trying to convince her. So you get more than what you put in, and you get it back right away using this tax refund. So it's not going to hurt you. You can, not going to hurt your income today. And then I found out, oh, maybe she didn't have a green card. So then there goes the third issue that we haven't fixed. And, that would be a political issue to decide whether we want people who don't have green cards to be able to get their Social Security benefits. So actually, Social Security makes money off a lot of immigrants who don't have green cards because they collect their taxes and then they never get their benefits.
Right.
They have a paper on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Another issue is something that not all these problems can be fixed by Social Security. For example, the low wages. That's something that's maybe could be better remedied by improving our education around the country, especially in inner cities, rural areas, and reservations where people are not getting good educations and then maybe having hard times finding jobs there too. So that's not something Social Security can fix by itself. That's more of an education issue, and maybe how we fund education. Maybe education should be not funded so much by the local community, but funded by the state or the federal government.
But that's not something that Social Security is responsible for, or indeed can provide a solution for. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Another one is an example for LGBTQ people. We just passed something that gives marriage equality, through the courts, and then Congress did it, that they can marry. And what's interesting is the poverty levels now for LGBTQ people who marry is really pretty good. It's not as good as the national average, but it's still pretty good. There's a lot of LGBTQ people that still do not marry someone of the same gender because actually you can still be discriminated in most states. Well, majority of states, you can be discriminated. You could be fired, or you could be denied housing, or a meal, and that's actually legal in a majority of states. So some of those things, if they were fixed, I think it would have the same effects as the marriage equality bills that passed. That once people feel that, because if I get married, one of the jokes was if I get married in Pennsylvania on Sunday, I could be fired on Monday because there are no protections. Now, actually, the EEOC is now trying to stop that, and the Supreme Court has actually agreed with them. But this is still sort of changing law. Maybe if you're a religious organization, you could do it. So discrimination is still legal, and so hopefully, maybe passing of a civil rights rule to include LGBTQ people, especially transgender now, that could improve things. Once there's more discrimination, then maybe you can get better jobs, and then therefore have better Social Security incomes. Again, that's not something Social Security can do on their own. That's something that has to come from somewhere else.
Let me take a moment to remind listeners that you're listening to Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. On this podcast, we talk to Academy volunteers and leaders, as well as friends of the Academy, about what inspires them about their work, either professionally or as an Academy volunteer. Please subscribe to Actuary Voices on your preferred podcast platform. And while your paper specifically looks at some disadvantaged groups, I think in total it highlighted 14, and people can download that entire paper from our website, and I'll give you a URL at the end.
Thanks for the advertising.
No problem. There are some bigger structural issues that have been identified with Social Security. I think it's probably wise that we reflect on those as well, if we could. So could you give some background on that? Because I've read that in a few years, it's possible that Social Security will only be able to pay out 80 cents on the dollar unless some changes are made.
Right. In fact, this is another area where I was almost afraid to retire because I didn't think I'd have any purpose or need. But the academy gave me purpose by writing another paper talking about this very topic that you're saying, and that is, if Social Security, the projections are now, the trust funds reserves could be depleted, and at that point, it can no longer use the trust fund. So the money coming in from Social Security taxes will be only enough to pay 80% of benefits in 2034. So we either need to increase that or decrease the benefits. And our paper said that sooner rather than later is important, because if you do it now, you can start making changes, phase them in so people's plans aren't too terribly upset. But if you wait until 2034, which is what they did back in 1983, you don't have as many choices, and you end up having to pretty much increase taxes. You can't reduce benefits. So they need to move now if they want, 50%, a typical solution would be 50% of cutting benefits and 50% of increasing taxes. So each party kind of gets half of what they want. Um, so yeah, some of the reasons why it's running out of money is because we're not having as many kids as we used to, and the Social Security actuaries know that. And that could be replaced by immigrants. Immigrants, they come in and they can go right to work instead of waiting 21 years. So immigration could help. But if both immigration and births are low, then the money coming in eventually is not as much. In addition, we're living longer, and everybody's heard about this, especially actuaries who may be listening. We're living longer, and so that's another reason why the system is getting a little bit more expensive. One way to deal with that, for example, would be to raise the retirement age. And I know a lot of people are uncomfortable about that, because they say, I don't know if I can work any longer. And so, for some of the proposals out there, there's a way to handle that. And you could say, okay, if we raise the normal retirement age by 1 year, that means it's pretty much the same thing as reducing benefits by 7%. So what we could do is we could just say to the low income people, okay, we'll raise the benefit formula 7% for you. So it's a wash. So you're not going to get hurt. It's totally offsetting the impact of a retirement age increase. So that's one way to deal with that issue. Then another thing, people who are disabled might say, I'm disabled, but I cannot satisfy the disability definition. And so they could relax that disability definition so that even though you're 66, we could say, yep, you can get a disability benefit now. So there are some ways to fix these and address these problems. Other ways, of course, are to raise the taxes. Most people don't want that. Also, they don't want their benefits cut. They don't want taxes increased. But there are ways to do it by, say, instead of increasing the tax rate, which would impact everybody, you could just raise the maximum earnings, which are taxed. And some new ideas like Medicare now not only taxes earnings, but it also taxes investment income. So that's another idea that could go for Social Security too, but it could be a lot of money. So this is a problem that can be solved. It's just going to take leadership and strength on the part of the membership to do it.
And I believe they could also diversify the way that they invest the money, because at the moment, as you say, I think it's in a trust fund and does not get a lot of interest. And if go ahead,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Right now, it just has treasury bonds. And as you know, a few years ago, treasury bonds weren't earning much, 1, 2, 3%. Now they're up, 4 and 5. But, it would be wonderful if Social Security could get a better return, because then some people might say, I could do a better return on my own. And that's one reason why everybody has to be in Social Security, because actually high income people, they pay in more than they get back, and their employer match actually is subsidizing the low income people who get more than they put in. It also, interestingly enough, subsidizes high income people who have non-working spouses. Social Security gives this wonderful 50% benefit, 50% of their working spouses benefit. while they're both alive. And then after the working spouse dies, their benefit bumps up to the whole amount. So they get a good deal too. So it's interesting. Some people have suggested that benefit be eliminated and replaced by something called earning sharing. So they actually would not share the money while they're living together, but their Social Security record would say, okay, what was the total amount you earned? Cut it in half, and now your earning record is just like your spouse's earning record, so that a divorced spouse, who might not have had any income under the old rules, now has an income equal to her spouse. So even after they separate or after they divorce, that's another kind of a good fix to help. Uh, and the poverty rates for widows, single people, and survivors, and divorced people are much higher. So, and that would not only help them, it also helps all these other categories. The Because a lot of this problem is seen in Black and Hispanic families, so it would help them too.
Yeah, I'd like to return to one thing you said earlier about people living longer, because while we've read about that for over the last few decades, in recent years, the increase has slowed, if not actually declined, for some sections of the population. So, for let's say middle class and above, the increase has continued. But for blue collar workers, and certainly as a result of COVID and the opioid crisis, we've actually seen declines in longevity among some groups, which is another reason they perhaps do not want to increase the retirement age, because it will seriously, or have a greater impact rather, have a greater impact on the amount of time that they have where they don't have to work every day.
Right. Yeah, like you said, high income people, we're still living longer and longer, just like people in other countries. But our low income people are not doing as well, and the disparity is changing. Social Security actuaries have cranked in longevity improvement into their projections. So they've known this for a long time, but in the last decade or so, it's been particularly interesting how the mortality and lifespans have diverged. And so that brings up a good question for low income people and in blacks too. There have been studies saying that, well, because of this, and especially if you raise the retirement age, like you mentioned, um, that maybe blacks and low income people don't get as much back from Social Security as they put in, and that would be terrible. And so further studies have shown that, well, the prior studies didn't notice the fact that the low income people uh, are more likely in physically demanding jobs and are more likely to become disabled or die. And so they end up getting disability benefits and death benefits. So when you crank that in, um, you'll find that low income people, they still do get more back than they put in. So that's good. But maybe we should spread that out a little bit more and improve the benefits. So that's why, for low income people. So that's why you hear people talking about a more progressive benefit, give more to people at the low end so that we make sure they get more back than what they put in.
Well, Ron, we're coming to the end of our time. Are there any other points you'd like to make about your paper or Social Security, or indeed anything? We're open to all and sundry here.
Yeah, I would encourage actuaries and people listening to this conversation to read our two papers that just came out. One is on financially disadvantaged groups, and the other is on fixing Social Security sooner rather than later. There's a lot of very interesting actuarial stuff in these papers. It gets into, for example, the question you asked earlier on how long are people living, and it shows mortality by race. It also shows it by education and by income. And sure enough, your point was really important that certain races do not live as long, like African Americans and AIAN, American Indian and Alaska Natives. The other interesting thing was that actually Hispanics and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans actually live longer than whites on average. So that was kind of interesting. A lot of interesting things. So I encourage people to read those papers. And I think the last thing that I want to wrap up with is that, a lot of people are asking, will Social Security be there for me? Some people are thinking they need to retire as soon as possible so they can get as much as they can out of it. And I would encourage them to do what's right for them. Sometimes retiring as late as 70 makes the most sense financially. And so I would encourage people still to do that, because Congress is going to fix this. Whenever I gave those speeches around the country with members of Congress, the ending statement they'd always make is, "We are going to fix this." And here's a good reason. There'll be 80 million people voting, won't be voting for him if they don't fix it. And they know that. And so they know they have to fix it.
And a further clarification, if I may, people can retire when they want, but it's when they actually choose to start taking Social Security that decides how much they get, right?
Good point. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Commencement of Social Security benefits is a separate issue from retirement.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I hope maybe we can talk again in a few years when we've solved Social Security and we can exult.
Well, I would hope so. But to tell you the truth, when I was at the Academy in the 90s, we were talking about the same thing. How do we solve Social Security? We knew it was going to, the trust fund reserves were going to gradually run out in the 2030s, but we're still talking about that same problem.
Ron, thank you so much for your time today. Today, I was speaking with Ron Gebhardtsbauer, one of the authors of a new white paper from the Academy, Social Security and Financially Disadvantaged Groups. It's available on our website at actuary.org/socially disadvantaged. My name is David Nolan, and I'm the host of Actuary Voices, a podcast of the American Academy of Actuaries. Please visit our website, actuary.org, for a wealth of information about the work that the Academy does. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast on your preferred podcast platform.